Yo, what's happening everyone? It's me, it's Count, here with a brand new Pokemon Go video. Today I'm going to be talking about raiding, more specifically with Darkrai and some of my gripes with how Darkrai was released. And I really think this is a huge missed opportunity from Niantic, and moving forward I really hope they reconsider how they release their Pokemon and their legendaries in raids. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about all of that. I'm going to be talking about how Tier 6 raiding has negative ramifications with rural players, and I'm going to be getting into a lot of the nitty-gritty when it comes to raid groups and different things like that. So if you end up enjoying this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well, and don't forget that little bell. And if you want to support this channel financially, I highly suggest you go and check out my Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Every little bit helps when it comes to making these videos, so definitely go and check it out. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Alrighty, so let's talk about legendary raids. Let's talk about Darkrai. Like many of us, I was really surprised that Darkrai was a tier 6 raid boss instead of being a tier 5. Now I know that when you go against Darkrai, it says that it is a level 5 raid boss, but in actuality, if you look at its stats, it's close to what a tier 6 would actually be. This is indicated by his insanely high raid boss CP, as well as its HP. You require a lot more players than you normally would if it was a tier 5, like a true tier 5. And this has been a detriment to a lot of my friends who play Pokemon Go. A lot of my friends who live in rural areas, they're having a lot of difficulty getting enough players together in order to beat this boss. But if it was a true tier 5, then you would have only needed 2 to 3 players in order to beat this boss. And I honestly think raid activity would be much higher if it was a true tier 5. Now the only logical explanation that I have when it comes to why Darkrai was a tier 6 is because Niantic is kind of giving it the Mewtwo treatment. They want to keep it a lot more rare than it has to be. And honestly, I don't understand that logic, mainly because if you think about Darkrai, it is a mythical. You can't really trade it. So I just don't get the idea of it being more rare. That sort of argument never really worked when it came to Pokemon Go, because this game is all about grinding. It's all about, you know, having the best of a particular Pokemon. People want to do as much of these as they can. They want to get their hands on as much of these Pokemon as they can so that they could top out with the best of the best in terms of IVs. So this idea of the Pokemon has to be rare, like, that logic kind of falls flat when it comes to these legendaries and mythicals like Deoxys and Darkrai. Like, that argument works for shinies, mainly because there are certain shinies that are you could only get in the wild. You can't get them through community days and raids, and those are definitely rare, but that sort of rarity is fine. Like, I honestly don't mind that I don't have a lot of friends who have a 100% shiny Arcanine like I do. That's a little bit of a brag right there, my apologies, but you know, there's certain Pokemon having their rarity intact through just general gameplay mechanics like shinies. That is fine. But when it comes to legendaries, when it comes to mythicals, these are actually Pokemon that we would use in raid battles and PvP. So obviously, in order for us to stay competitive in those areas, we have to have the best of the best. So the logic behind keeping a Pokemon rare, that doesn't necessarily work when it comes to legendaries and mythicals. That's just my opinion, but I know a lot of people disagree. I can see it in the comments already that legendaries and mythicals are supposed to be rare, but this isn't the mainstream games. This isn't the Game Boy games where you can only get one shot at each legendary. No, this is a game that requires a lot of farming. It's a game that requires a lot of grinding, and that's what makes it fun. So when it comes to raids, doing them en masse is a lot more beneficial for players as well as the game itself. instead of just making it extremely difficult and kind of making it harder to farm up these bosses. Another argument that I hear quite often regarding why Darkrai was made into a tier 6 is because they want to engage more players, that they want to make it difficult enough so that you need a lot more players in order to defeat it. So when it comes to raiding a boss, instead of just having 2 to 3 players for that boss, now you need at least 5 to 6 at least. And of course, this is going to drive up engagement. This is going to get players to recruit a lot more players in order to take down these bosses. And with that logic, it just kind of falls flat when you actually go out into the field. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to difficult raid bosses such as this one, like Darkrai, well, a lot of people are unmotivated to raid this boss if they can't get like 7 or 8 or even 10 players. Even if they have the bare minimum of 5 to 6, they'll just probably just cancel out of the raid because they feel like, you know, in the fringe case that if they can't defeat it, then they have to work towards finding even more people. Ironically, when it came to Rayquaza, and of course I do understand that Rayquaza did have a shiny form that was recently introduced, but every time Rayquaza comes back in raids, it requires a lot less people in order to defeat it, and you can get a lot more raid activity out of the hole. So you see multiple groups of 2 to 3 or even 4 players raiding this boss. Sometimes you'll just end up with a mega group of 20 people, but in general the raiding activity is just much higher. People who they don't necessarily need this boss, or they don't necessarily need that Pokemon, they're still motivated to go out and raid even though they don't necessarily need it, mainly because, well, it's an easy boss, it doesn't really matter, it's not going to be a huge time commitment, it's not going to be hard to find a group, so I might as well just raid it. Like, the mentality is a lot different when the boss is a lot easier. People are able to farm it up more, people are able to grind it more. But when a boss is like Darkrai, which is what, the best dark type in terms of DPS times TDO, like you should be going for this Pokemon, a lot of people are unmotivated to raid it, mainly because it's difficult. So they don't want to sit there and try to build up a group for it, and they don't necessarily want to have that huge time commitment in case there's a couple failed attempts. So, you know, that's something that Niantic, I feel like, has kind of failed to realize when it comes to raid difficulty. I feel like they think, you know, just making it more difficult, they kind of have that urban mentality when they're designing the game. Like, if they make it more difficult, it'll require more people to raid it, then more people will come out to raid it, right? Like, that's their mentality, but it doesn't work that way in the suburbs and rural areas, especially in rural areas. Now, I kind of want to take a moment and talk about what motivates players to raid to begin with, because I think if Niantic really hones in on these things, then they can balance their raid bosses to a way that really helps players as well as helps their revenue, because the more people raid, obviously the more money they make. So I really think they have to find that Goldilocks spot in order to get more people raiding. So when I think about what motivates players to raid, I think about 3 things. First and foremost, they are looking for the absolute best of the best IVs. 100% Pokemon are highly coveted, especially with legendaries. So a lot of players are doing a lot of these raids in order to get that perfect IV. So I definitely think at the top of the list when it comes to legendary raids, people are looking for perfect IVs. Next, I would say the main motivator is something gimmicky like shinies, or maybe it's some sort of rare thing like a move or an exclusive move. I think that's the second motivator. Obviously that doesn't apply to about 60% of all legendaries that get released, but that is a huge motivator. If people are not interested in a boss but there's a shiny form, then they'll come out for that boss. We saw that recently with Giratina altered form. And then the third motivator is all of the little things, right? Like Stardust, experience, rare candies. These are things that a lot of players really want at a constant basis. So of course they're going to go out and raid if this is an easy avenue for them to get these items. So you're looking at 3 different motivators for any player to do a legendary raid. Aside from just collecting the Pokédex entry, I think a lot of players really look to these 3 things when it comes to legendary raids. So what is the common factor behind all three of these? I actually think it's the grinding and the farming aspect of it. Like for example, if you're looking for Stardust and you find raids as a good source of Stardust gain, well, you're gonna do a whole bunch of raids in order to get those 1,000 a pop Stardusts, right? So, you know, when it comes to Stardust events, I saw a lot of players doing just a ton of raids, and I really think that is a strong motivator. But if you make a boss too difficult, like what Darkrai is right now, and it's essentially not farmable, well, people are not going to raid. They're going to find other avenues of Stardust. You got to realize that when it comes to Pokemon Go, the easiest method, the means with the least resistance is what players are going to gravitate towards. So when it comes to a Pokemon like Rayquaza with its raids, like it only required 2 to 3 people, yeah, people are going to farm it up for Stardust and rare candies. But when it comes to Darkrai, because it's so difficult and because it's essentially not farmable, people are going to avoid it because they feel like they have other means of getting Stardust that's just a lot more efficient. And especially when it comes to perfect IVs, I feel like the sentiment behind Darkrai is that people don't necessarily care about perfect IVs for this Pokemon because they're just not able to do it in mass. They are settling for 98%, 96%, even 93% with 15 attack. Like they're settling for those and they're calling it quits because they just don't like the way that it feels so heavy when they're trying to defeat this boss. So even with perfect IVs, I feel like with Rayquaza, people were motivated a lot more to get perfect IVs. Like people were doing 30 to 40 raids a day with Rayquaza, and it's because they were motivated for that perfect IV. And yeah, perfect IV Rayquazas were pretty nice, and obviously it's not going to be the most relevant dragon type for long, but because it's a glass cannon, because a perfect IV could go a long way, people really wanted those. And because Rayquaza was a lot easier, because it was essentially farmable, people were doing a lot more of them per day. So this should have been a good indicator to Niantic that the easier the raid boss is, the more people are going to do them. And of course, this was the third time that Rayquaza was out in raids, so you would think that its relevance was not as strong as it was before. And yes, I do recognize that they did introduce the shiny form and people wanted those shinies, but my goodness, like if you think about Giratina compared to Rayquaza, some people only did like 1 or 2 Giratina until they got their shiny and then they just quit it altogether. But with Rayquaza, they wanted 20 shinies, they wanted 30 shinies, and they just went and raided and raided and raided because it was so easy. So, you know, it's just a matter of psychology. It's a matter of people's mentalities when it comes to the difficulty of a boss. Like I'm seeing it constantly, like left and right. People are not rating Darkrai. Like I still want a 100% Darkrai, but I'm not as motivated to get it as I was with Rayquaza, if that kind of makes sense. I'm sure Niantic has all of the numbers before them. I'm sure they're looking at different things, but I really hope they consider the ground level kind of perspective that people in rural areas, people in suburban areas, we want to do more raids, we want to spend more money in the game, but by making these bosses more difficult, it's not helping that cause. Raiding is essentially dead in rural areas right now, and it's because of how difficult Darkrai is. So yeah, it's just unfortunate. I really hope Niantic reconsiders, and for future raid bosses and for future legendaries, they consider making the bosses just a little bit easier. And of course, there's always alternative solutions, like if they had scaling raid bosses. Like I don't understand why that hasn't been implemented yet. Like if you can only muster about 2 to 3 players for a raid boss, why not make it a little bit easier and actually doable for a smaller group, but at the same time lower the rewards or even increase the IV floor so your chances of getting a perfect IV is much lower. But at the same time, it's still doable, right? Like if you, instead of just having no raid at all, why not make it a little bit easier and tune down the rewards? I think that would be pretty fine. But anyway, these are just my thoughts regarding tier 6 rating. I just don't think it's just right for the game, and we've seen it a lot of times before, especially with highly coveted Pokemon like Mewtwo and different things like that. I just think Niantic has to consider that the easier the raid boss is, the higher the activity is going to be across the board. So yeah, if they want to make revenue, if they want to make money, they have to consider this a lot more moving forward. But that's going to be it for this video, everyone. I would love to know your thoughts. Definitely share them below. And yeah, I am Count Jinsula, and I'll catch you all later. Hey guys, before I leave, I have to give a little bit of a spiel. I mean, when it comes to the YouTube algorithm, it's extremely difficult to gauge how successful you can be on YouTube. Like, there are some times where I have a ton of views on my videos, and there are some days where I just have no views on my videos, and it really comes down to the YouTube algorithm. And there's a lot of times where I get dinged for some of the songs that I pick or some of the footage that I show, and unfortunately it's because YouTube's copyright system is a little bit broken. But if you want to support this channel financially, I highly suggest you check out my Patreon. A link to it is in the description below. Your support definitely helps me out, and it helps support this channel because I would love to crank out more videos and increase the quality, and for that to happen, I do need your help. So definitely go and check out that link. And yeah, big shout out and big thank you to all of you for supporting my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. If you did, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell as well. Check out the links in the description below. I am Count Jinsula, and I'll catch you all later.